Hey, welcome NFL football fans. It's that time again. Time for another edition of NFL Football Talk. I'm your host, Charles E. Smith Jr. This is an Inside Sports production, and we are finally down to, we know who's going to be in Super Bowl 52 coming up in just a week or so here. And we're going to take a look at the NFL this week, look at the trends, everything from the season. There's a new football league starting, everybody. It's going to start in 2 years. We'll tell you all about that. Will it be successful this time? We don't know, but let's go ahead and get right into it. Let me go ahead and bring in my co-host. Many of you already follow on Twitter, and if not, you should be. You follow him at Chris L Sports. That's at CHRIS, the letter L, and then Sports. He is a proud graduate of Rutgers University from somewhere in an undisclosed location in beautiful Southern California. Lives my favorite East Coast intellectual, Chris Lardieri. How you doing out there, man?
Charles, thanks as always. I've got the Rutgers shirt on tonight to prove I actually went there. Can't believe we are here right before Super Bowl 52. Where did the season and the year go?
Yeah, I know. Here we are, and that's. I just wonder though, with ratings and everything, the way that they were, and then the playoff season. I mean, I love football, but there were only a couple of really compelling games in there, all the way through to championship weekend. And championship weekend itself was half dud when we looked at the Vikings scoring the first touchdown of the game and then giving 38 unanswered points up to the Philadelphia Eagles and losing that game. But the Jacksonville Jaguars, they had the Patriots. They didn't have them beaten. But when you put a team down by 10 points in the fourth quarter, you have a legit shot to win that game, and they just flat out could not do it. But you know what? We got to say that the ominous precursor really happened near the end of the first half when they were at the Patriots' 44-yard line, 3rd and 7, and what happens? They wind up back at their own 45, punt to New England. So instead of them getting a field goal and extending their lead, they punt the ball to the New England 15. New England goes on an 85-yard drive and scores a touchdown right before the half. And even though Jacksonville still led 14-10, I think we kind of all knew what was coming.
Yeah, definitely. And then even in the second half, the controversial fumble by Miles Jack, turned out he did pick up the ball, but as usual, the whistles blow, and that's one thing that drives me nuts about the NFL. These referees blow the whistle whether they know the play is dead or not, all but killing anything. And with the way the rules work, he gets the ball, but he can't advance it. So there's another turning point. And let's face it, besides that, when you have the Patriots down, as we learned in the Super Bowl last year, see the Atlanta Falcons, you need to put them away. A 10-point lead is not enough. And at the end of the day, Blake Bortles couldn't get the job done as we suspected when they needed to convert. Even late in the game, they had their chances driving down the field, and he couldn't complete passes. And ultimately, that's what differentiates the Patriots from their opponents. I mean, you look at a team even like the Eagles, a lot of people think this is going to be a cakewalk. I mean, we can discuss that in the coming shows, but at the end of the day, when you got Tom Brady versus Nick Foles, this is why people think the Patriots are invincible. And the only man to slay him twice was Eli Manning, who may or may not keep his job with the Giants. But, say what you want about the guy. He won 2 Super Bowls against one of the greatest franchises in NFL history. So moral of the story, Doug Peterson, you better shoot to kill on next Sunday in Minneapolis, proverbially, of course.
Of course. Chris Lardieri does not advocate gun violence. Okay, there you go. I got you. And, but Jacksonville, still, they were up 20-10 in the fourth quarter, and we'll go through the fumble by Dion Lewis was at the 33-yard line of the Jacksonville Jaguars. But even they got that fumble recovered, and what do? Instead of driving down the field, taking something out of that New England defense and maybe at least getting a field goal, they go 3 and out. So the Patriots fumble, a minute and 30 seconds later, they have the ball back at their own 15-yard line, and what do? 85-yard drive makes it 20-17. Then later on, you got the punt by Jacksonville, punt to the 50-yard line, big return of 20 yards by Amendola, and we all know what's going to happen there. We just knew it.
Yeah,
we knew it, and it was so I mean, I can't say disappointing because it's not like necessarily rooting for one team or the other, but if these teams could just execute, and I'm going to say this, and this goes back to I've been watching football since the 70s. I don't think I've ever seen a team that just flat out executes all game in, game out, and especially in the biggest game, like the New England Patriots. And we talk about the Giants having beaten them twice. What did the Giants really do? It was they stuck to their game plan. They did not make any mistakes, and they had a big play in each of those Super Bowls that really kind of turned things on the Patriots. But these teams, they can get them down, but they can't put them out. When it comes time to play that crucial situational football, nobody does it better than the Patriots.
Yeah, and you've got to hand that to Bill Belichick. That's coaching right there. That's going over situations and beating into their head about not turning the ball over, fumbling, clock management, and etc. Talk about there have been studies at sports, baseball, for instance, a manager really only has an effect over a handful of games in a 162 game season. Well, that's not the case in football, and we're clearly seeing that with Bill Belichick.
Yeah, that's true. Now, if we look at Belichick, though, and they talk about will this be the end of the line, the end of the ride for him? And well, we think about it now. He's going to be coaching in what is this 8th Super Bowl now with Brady. So also he's losing his offensive coordinator, and Josh McDaniels is going to be headed to Indianapolis. His defensive coordinator, Matt Patricia, is going to go to Detroit. So losing his offensive coordinator, his defensive coordinator, playing in your 8th Super Bowl, you're looking at starting next season with a 40-year-old quarterback. Would this be a time for Belichick, to just say, hey, it's been a heck of a ride, but you guys can rebuild the team with a 40-year-old quarterback, find your offensive and defensive coordinator and a head coach, because I'm not down with the whole quasi-rebuilding thing.
Yeah, normally I would say with any other coach, that's a valid assumption. But after all, this is Belichick, and what's he going to do for a year? I mean, even if he sits out for a year, it's not like he's going to announce. He's not the most charismatic guy or insightful guy like, say, a Bruce Arians, who's rumored to be in the running for the Monday Night Football job. So, I mean, it's a valid possibility, especially given the ESPN report about the supposed strife between Kraft, Brady, and Belichick. But at the end of the day, I just think this guy will keep on coaching. And when he lost Charlie Weiss and Romeo Crennel back, 13 years ago, I believe it was, he kept plugging along. I mean, they didn't have the success right away that they had with the previous few years. But if anything, it might make him more determined.
Yeah, that's true. So, hey, you know what? Major props to him. And also, we got to look at the Eagles. Let's look at the team they're going to be playing. Doug Peterson keeping the group together. And what I liked about this, when I looked at that Minnesota game, now, granted, Minnesota showed the signs of kind of falling apart in the game that they barely won against New Orleans the week before. And then Keenum kind of continued that in the NFC Championship game. But Nick Foles, he was absolutely lights out on a couple of those throws that he made to us, hitting Torrey Smith, Alshon Jeffrey, Zach Ertz, those guys. But he's really playing well. And Foles, this is the best I've seen him throw the ball. I mean, do I dare say since he was in college, maybe?
Either that or the year Chip Kelly was first year with the Eagles, and he only had 2 interceptions. I know they had an early playoff exit, but maybe Doug Peterson is quarterback wizard of sorts. I mean, Foles has bounced around, and look, we got to give the guy some slack. He was with Jeff Fisher and the Rams. We can't necessarily hold that against his body of work. But yeah, other than that 1 year with Kelly, it really hasn't shown signs of this since his days at Arizona.
Right. And then we got Chip Kelly, who proved to, and when you look at his development or lack thereof, you could attribute that to Chip Kelly being kind of a lame duck coach. Then they go to Jeff Fisher. Fisher had both Keenum and Foles and couldn't develop either of them. And you look at this, when we look at Jeff Fisher and how specious his coaching ability may have been, remember, he had Foles, couldn't do anything with him. He had Keenum, couldn't do anything with him. Had Jared Goff, couldn't do anything with him. So at a certain point, you got to look at the common denominator and all that.
Yeah, and the ironic thing is, I believe Fisher came out a couple months ago and said he was interested in coaching again, but guess that market dried up, right?
Exactamundo. So, looking at the Vikings, we talk about that with Case Keenum. Interesting situation they have there, though, with Keenum. And then you've got Teddy Bridgewater, who's supposed to be really their franchise quarterback, but I think he hasn't thrown a pass in, what, 2 years in an NFL game. Then you got Sam Bradford, who, I don't know, what does he average? 5 games a year, maybe, through his career before he goes down with an injury. And then you got Keenum, who's, so you got those three QBs. Which way do you go there? And remember, and Shermer, their offensive coordinator, now he's going to be coaching your Giants. So even though they got to the NFC Championship game, but a lot of turmoil going on there in the land of 5,000 lakes, I think it is.
Yeah, 10,000.
And a lot of mosquitoes. A lot of mosquitoes.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, and 10,000 lakes and Prince, etc. But no, here's what I think. Sam Bradford, too much with the injuries and the amount of money he makes. I think he's gone. There's a very good chance Keenum could leave. I mean, I think he's made himself a fair share of money potentially in free agency with the way he played this year. Bridgewater, remarkable comeback. He did come back. I think he got into one game against the Bengals and maybe threw a couple passes, one of which was intercepted. But at this point, a lot of it what will come into play here is salary cap. And I think of the three, you got to figure Bridgewater coming off an injury would probably be the cheapest options of the three. And I'm sure maybe they go into the draft eventually and look to develop a backup because, as we know, the Eagles and Vikings have shown you need a quality backup quarterback in this league.
Yeah, that's true. But, well, I'm glad I don't have to make that decision. That's left to those guys who make all those millions of dollars and have to do that. I'd say definitely Bradford's out. Then it's a matter of what you want to do with Keenum. And looking at also what Keenum knows he can demand at this point and what he's going to want to work to, to get, will he work with the salary cap or is he going to want to go ahead and get maximum dollars? And both he and Foles, I think what they've done, Foles has turned himself into, hey, you know what? He's a $20 million quarterback now, 25 maybe.
Yeah. Thinking of Keenum, right off the bat, I look at Denver, a team that's established defense and just a quarterback away from probably being a playoff team again. And who knows, Jacksonville, they may just jettison Blake Bortles and look for an experienced veteran. It's not like you need a guy that's going to have to sling the ball 50 times to win with that team. You just need someone to manage the game, make the throws when they need them, and not turn the ball over. So armchair free agency here is those are two potential landing spots for Keenum, in my opinion.
I think so. All Jacksonville needs is a Brad Johnson. That's all they need. They just need a Brad Johnson.
Yeah.
Okay, so and we talked about your Giants. Pat Shurmur is going to be the coach. Also, Dave Gettleman, who was the GM in Carolina from 2013 to 2016, he's now the GM. So, I mean, you got to like it. That's your team out there. But I kind of like where the Giants are headed now. It seems like they've really got some stable pieces in place there, and maybe they can get back to being Big Blue.
You would think, but until that team addresses the offensive line and the looming contract issue they're going to have with OBJ, who's looking to make big-time Antonio Brown money, I'll believe it when I see it. And, I'll give Gettleman this. He talks a good game. He loves doing interviews with the Daily News and the Post in New York. He loves talking about how Eli's his guy and this and that. He's doing a lot of talking. I mean, he's quite the opposite of Jerry Reese, but talk is cheap, and let's face it. The Giants leaked out there that they wanted McDaniels or Patricia, and they ended up with Shurmur, and he's their second choice, however they want to spin it. Now, I know Shurmur's done wonderful things with quarterbacks, but he didn't have a great run as head coach in Cleveland, had issues with the media there. Good luck in New York, the eye of the tiger, the mouth of the shark, whatever analogy you want to use. But at this point, they need to fix that line. They need to get those malcontents on defense straightened out, and we'll see what happens there. That said, they play in a division, the NFC East, where teams can easily go from worst to first. You look at what the Cowboys did a few years ago. You look at the Eagles coming off a 7-9 season, made it to the Super Bowl. So it's not going to take a heck of a lot of work, but I think a lot will be hinging on that number 2 pick. What do they do? Do they pick Eli's successor, or do they think Davis Webb is able to be developed into a starter in a few years? Do they take Saquon Barkley? Do they trade out of that pick and acquire picks to build up in other areas of need? Remains to be seen, but it's going to be an interesting offseason. And I'll go out on a limb and say I think they'll be better than 3-13 next year. That's about all I can assure you.
Yep, there you go. I would take that bet. And also interesting, Mike Vrabel, who was the defensive coordinator for the Texans, now he's going to be the head coach of the Tennessee Titans. So let's get this straight. The Tennessee Titans upset Kansas City in the playoffs. And after that, they lose to the Patriots like, teams tend to do. But then their coach and the team decide to mutually part ways, whereas the coach, Andy Reid, who suffered that huge upset, had no business losing that game. He's still in charge in Kansas City. That's the way that goes?
Yeah, see, the problem with Andy Reid, he's got this little thing called leverage, and he gets paid a lot of money, whereas Malarkey's contract was up. So, they could just call it a mutual parting of the ways when essentially Malarkey was fired because they just chose not to sign on the dotted line with a new deal. So that's how it works in life, man. It's all about the money and the crowbar you've got.
All about the Benjamins. It comes down to it again.
Kelvin.
Okay, so hey, now amidst all the declining ratings of the NFL, and I know it's there's a lot of hyperbole involved in that, but like I said, a lot of people, they're following the league, not necessarily sitting down to watch the 3.5-hour games anymore. And I spoke with someone recently who kind of boycotted the season with the whole players kneeling thing, and he hasn't watched any games. And one of the things he said was just how freeing it was to actually have an extra day added into the week during football season. And really is not wavering from it. I know I didn't speak to the one person who is the oracle into the minds of everyone who ever watched football, but I think when you talk about starting new habits, once next football season starts, you're going to have all these people who realize now that they can get through an entire football season without watching it, and the sun still keeps coming up every morning. The NFL might find themselves in a bit of a quandary there. And then you contrast that with Vince McMahon also wanting to fire up the XFL again.
Yeah, I've got to laugh. I think honestly, the people who boycotted the NFL, they're gone. Are they coming back? I don't know, but there are two things that come to mind here. The NFL ratings were off the charts 2 years ago. I mean, there are a number of reasons for that. They've declined last year. They tried to blame it on the election. This year, I don't know what they're going to blame it on. Protests, global warming, lack of rain in Southern California. I really don't know. But one thing I've noticed is the people I talk to still are watching football have similar complaints. The games are long. They're not as interesting. College is more exciting. Honestly, and the league will never admit to this or address this, the product is watered down because they're oversaturating us with it. They start on Thursday night in a game which neither team ever seems to want to play, or the players are in it to just not get hurt. So you get a crappy Thursday night game for the most part. Then you've got all day Sunday, you've got Sunday night, and then by Monday night, no one wants to watch again. And like we've said before, unless you got money on the game or fantasy football on the line, people aren't going to watch. Look, I've got 2 kids. I don't sit down on a Sunday and watch from 10 in the morning till 8:30, 9 o'clock at night like I used to when I didn't have kids. I mean, I'm selective with what I watch. So that said, I still think if you were to look at the TV ratings, NFL games will probably rank in top 10, 20 of all TV shows in a given calendar year. So in that respect, I don't think it's going away. What the NFL needs to address are things like the pass interference penalty becoming a strategic part of the game when, all right, we're down, let me hurl the ball up 50 yards and throw it a little bit behind the receiver and hope the cornerback or safety runs into my guy and we'll get a 50-yard play off a penalty. The stoppages with replays, the stoppages with referees trying to decipher what's going on. I know they're trying to work on the commercial breaks and shortening those, but look, the games are getting longer and people are distracted by other things that they weren't 30, 40 years ago, like phones and streaming media, and the fact that there's a heck of a lot more channels even to watch on TV, whether you cut the cord or not. So it's a number of things at play here, but I do feel very strongly that protest or not, you've got a game that it seems like from Thursday night on, it's always on, and at some point you're just going to reach this law of diminishing returns with your product, and the league's not going to change that. I mean, we've seen the stories. They're already putting the Thursday night package up for bid, and they'll probably get top dollars potentially from one of the networks. So this is a league that essentially just keeps draining the pig of whatever cash it can get, and ratings be damned, and long-term fan base be damned.
Yeah, it's true. As long as it's bringing the money, they'll keep on doing it. And then, so what would you think about, amidst all this, Vince McMahon trying to resurrect the XFL? And we know that these alternative football leagues have never worked, even when there weren't as many options. So even back to the WFL in the 70s, that didn't work. The USFL was probably the most successful of all of them, but it didn't really work. And then the XFL, when the first time around, only lasted one season. Now, what I've got to think, though, is he's targeting 2020 to start the first season. And it's going to be an 8-team league. They're going to play a 10-week season. And they're in 8 cities that are yet to be named. But we got new stadiums going up in Los Angeles, new stadium going up in Vegas. Do you see any strategic planning maybe going on there with Mr. McMahon?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the guy loves being in front of the camera and potentially making money. And it's funny how he flip-flop from 13 years ago when it was all bets were off and we're going to have half-naked cheerleaders on the sideline and mic coaches and guys with names that hate me on the back of their jersey. And to now it's good old wholesome family American fun. And I don't think it's going to work then. It didn't work then. I don't think it's going to work now. I get that there's an alternative and there's a market. And I'll give him this much. He said he wants the games to be 2.5 hours long. So I hope he is successful with that, because that could potentially force the NFL into making some changes. But at the end of the day, we as a country, we don't watch minor league sports. I mean, we watch college and we watch professional. And whether people like it or not, college is the de facto minor league, especially in basketball and football, for their professional sport counterparts. And what you're going to get with this XFL is a bunch of guys who maybe are CFL caliber players, couldn't make it in the NFL. I watched an interesting 30 for 30 with my son about the 87 strike. It's called Year of the Scab, and how the Redskins put a team together because the owners were trying to apply pressure to the players and got replacement players to keep playing the game. So that didn't last very long. That strike ended after a pretty short walkout. So I really don't think it's going to be successful. I mean, I admire the man for his bravado and courage and trying to address this market that he feels is out there. But I'm not going to watch. I mean, unless there's nothing else on, maybe out of curiosity, I'll see what the product looks like. But the NFL and is essentially based on names. And I think another thing that really hurt the league this year is your star players are out, your Aaron Rodgers, your OBJs, your JJ Watts, Deshaun Watsons. That's going to affect your ratings. And if you have a bunch of no names playing in the league, I don't think people are going to devote any time to that on a weekend.
That's true, but there were a lot of big names in this is Pro Bowl week here. The NFL just had the skills competition. There were a lot of big names in that. Nobody watched that, and the Pro Bowl is coming up, and nobody will watch that. So I guess you got to have competition, real competition mixed in.
Yeah. To clarify, we're not going to have practices or exhibitions. I've been to Rams training camp twice. I went to Giants training camp back in the day. They don't get the crowds that a real game do because it's practice. So they could spin the Pro Bowl all they want because ESPN's good at that sort of stuff. But no one wants to watch an exhibition where everyone's essentially playing not to get hurt.
Yeah. Yep, very, very true. It's about the competitive nature. That's why it becomes compelling when you got a bunch of guys out there, and that's why it is so horrible. And even in sports where they're not necessarily going to get hurt, but in sports where that competitive fire is not burning, you can feel it when you're sitting and watching. I've watched a few games with star players who were just out there kind of fooling around, and I don't show up to watch pro players not give 100% effort. So that's what it's all about. Sports, the unscripted drama, and you just don't want to see guys out there just fooling around. We don't want to see it.
Exactly. You can go to a playground and see that. I mean, look at the Olympics. Theoretically, although in some countries it's not the case, these are amateurs, but they're really not only representing their countries, they're laying it all on the line. What did Jim McKay once say? The human drama of athletic competition. I mean, that embodies it right there.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, everybody, remember the show is NFL Football Talk. every single week through this season, and we'll do a show after the Super Bowl to wrap everything up. We'll do one before to give our picks and prognostication and the X's and O's about who's going to win the Super Bowl. You can follow me on Twitter at The Inside Sports. Follow Mr. Lardieri on Twitter at Chris L Sports. That's at Chris, C-H-R-I-S, the letter L, and then Sports. So we're just about out of here in this the Pro Bowl week here. So, Mr. Lardieri, any final words for everyone?
Sure. The city of Philadelphia never ceases to amaze. We saw in the last few weeks, we saw a Eagles fan punch a police horse. Then before Sunday's NFC Championship, we saw the riot police and said horses go in. It's a debauchery. The Philadelphia Police Department applied Crisco to utility poles, so celebrating Eagles fans wouldn't climb them on Sunday night. We saw one guy running to get a subway train smack into a pole. So some things never change. But I will say, going into the Super Bowl, I think it'll be fascinating if the Eagles win. I mean, what's Philadelphia going to look like? I mean, they're just going to be home videos galore all over the internet and social media for the whole family to enjoy for days.
Well, you know what? That's what you call Philly charm, and no matter what, they still make a darn good cheesesteak there, homeboy.
Yeah, I'll give them that. I've been there enough and have friends from there and relatives that live near there. I guess it's not the Merriam-Webster definition of charm, but I get what you mean. It's got some sort of chutzpah, as they say, right?
There you go. Okay, everybody. So, hey, thanks for watching. And for Mr. Chris Lardieri, I'm Charles E. Smith, Jr. Thank you for watching NFL Football Talk. This is an Inside Sports production. We'll see everybody next week.